Okay, guys, so video number 2 for the week. We're going to be solving quadratic functions by factoring. So solving quadratic functions by factoring. Okay. So we talked about when they were graphed and the solutions, we just look and see where they cross the x-axis. Well, now we're going to find those solutions, those roots, those solutions, roots, and zeros by factoring. So a solution to a quadratic functions are the points at which the parabola crosses the x-axis, also known as roots, zeros, or x-intercepts. You'll also hear us call them solutions too. Well, actually, the solutions, there it is, right? So if the product, meaning multiplying, right, of two quantities equals 0, then at least one of the quantities will be equal to 0. So that's the zero product property. Basically, what that means is if x plus 3 times x plus 2 equals 0, then x plus 3 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0. Sounds a little confusing and abstract, but just know this is how we would solve for them. How would you get x alone from there? So picture it as x times y equals 0. Think of it as either x can be equal to 0, y can be equal to 0, or both can be equal to 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. So the big thing is, first step, we have to move every item every term, I guess, over to one side of the equation. So move every term over to one side of the equation. It must be equal to 0, right? Because we're trying to find the zeros. So over here, if we're looking at this first one, the first thing we're going to do is move this 10 over, right? And we are going to have x squared plus 3x minus 10 equals 0. It equals 0. That's exactly what we want. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and factor this. And I can just jump straight into the x factor because a is equal to 1. I can only use the shortcut, right? Not splitting the middle term. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the negative 10 on top and 3 on the bottom and try to think of what positive 3, what multiplies to negative 10 and adds to a positive 3. Well, that would be a positive 5 and a negative 2. So in parentheses, I'm going to do x plus 5 and x minus 2. And remember, they equal 0. So I moved everything over to the left. Then I factored the quadratic. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to do x plus 5 equals 0. Zero product property right here, folks. I'm going to do x minus 2 equals 0. And then I'm just going to solve. So I'm going to subtract 5 and subtract 5. And I'm going to add 2. And I'm going to add 2. And I will end up with x equals negative 5. And x equals a positive 2. So I'm basically solving for this fourth step. I'm solving for x for each factor. So solve for x for each factor. Now remember, we've got to write them as an ordered pair. So, well, actually don't remember, but know that you have to write as an ordered pair. So write as ordered pairs. So remember, my x value is negative 5. It's my x-intercept, so my y has to be 0. And then my next one is going to be 2. My x is 2, and it's an x-intercept, so y has to be equal to 0. And I'll make a little note. It's always x comma 0, and x-intercept will always have a y equal to 0. An x-intercept will always have a y equal to 0. All right, so let's try it with a couple here. So here, everything is already moved over to the left. It's equal to 0. So we can just start by factoring. And because a is equal to 1, right, it's only a 1 here, I can go ahead and just factor by jumping right into the x factor. So a positive 21 and a negative 10, what multiplies to a positive 21 and then adds to a negative 10, that would be negative 7 and negative 3. So I would have x minus 7 and x minus 3 equals 0. Then I would solve those two factors. So x minus 7 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0. And now I can solve. So add 7 and add 7 and add 3 and add 3. And I'll end up with x equals a positive 7 and x equals a positive 3. So I get my paper situated here. My 2 points, my coordinates of where the x-intercepts are, or my solutions, my roots, would be 7, 0 and 3, 0. Okay, so go ahead and pause me for a minute and see if you can do this one. Okay, hopefully you've paused me. If you need more help, that's totally fine. Again, this is a 1, so I can jump straight into my x factor, and it's already equal to 0, so I don't have to move anything over. So I'm going to jump straight into my x factor and do negative 20 at the top, and the middle brother that nobody likes at the bottom, which is a negative 1. And I think, hey, what multiplies to negative 20, but then adds together to a negative 1, and that would be a positive 4 and a negative 5. So I would have x plus 4 and x minus 5, and of course it equals 0. Now, I'm going to solve each of these so I can figure out what my roots are, what my solutions are. X plus 4 equals 0, and x minus 5 equals 0. All right, well, I'll subtract 4 and subtract 4, and I'll add 5, and I'll add 5, and I'll end up with x equals negative 4, and x equals 5. Oh, these are my answers. Try to bold those out so you guys, they stand out to you. And then I'll write them as coordinates. So negative 4, 0, and a positive 5, 0. And there I go. And then my last couple of problems, there's 6 more examples for me to do with you, which is why I'm not doing your homework with you this time, because I feel like this is a lot of help right here. Okay, so first thing that I need to do is for number 3 is it's not equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract the 7x and subtract the 7x. All right, I'm going to be left with x squared minus 12x minus 64 equals 0. And it's a 1 right here, so I can jump straight into my x factor. Negative 64 on top and a negative 12 on the bottom. Well, what multiplies to negative 64 but then adds to a negative 12 would be negative 16 and a positive 4. So I would have x minus 16 and x plus 4 equals 0. Again, I'm going to go ahead and solve. So x minus 16 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. I'll go ahead and add 16 and add 16 and subtract 4 and subtract 4. And I'll end up with x equals 16 and x equals negative 4. All right, this time I'm not going to write them as coordinates. I'm just going to go ahead and write x equals 16 and x equals negative 4. And that's another way to write my answers. If you prefer to write them as ordered pairs, that's fine. But this is just showing you what my two x's are. Okay, well here I can see that it's not equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 21 from both sides. And I'm going to end up with x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. Again, it's just a 1 here, so I can jump straight into that x factor. And it'll be negative 21 on top, and the middle brother that nobody likes on the bottom, 4. What multiplies to negative 21 and adds to 4 would be a positive 7 and a negative 3. So I would have x plus 7 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. Kind of just skipping this step right here, but it's the same thing. So minus 7 plus 3 plus 3. And I end up with x equals negative 7 and x equals positive 3. So again, I'm not going to write my answers as an ordered pair this time. This is totally fine. I'm just going to write x equals negative 7, 3. All right, well, let's move back here. So I got to get this equal to 0, right? So I'm going to add 15x and add 15x. And I'll end up with 3x squared plus 15x equals 0. Okay, well, one thing that we might be forgetting here, we might be panicked that this isn't just 1. But another thing that we might be forgetting is that we need to factor out the GCF. So don't forget that. And you'll see that these are both divisible by 3x. So I would factor out a 3x, and I'd be left with x plus 5 equals 0. And now I'll just take these two terms. So 3x equals 0 and x plus 5 equals 0. Right? I'm going to divide by 3 and divide by 3. I'm going to subtract 5 and subtract 5. And I will have my answers as x equals 0 and x equals negative 5. So again, I'm just going to write them down here. X equals 0 and negative 5. Box them up. And then I move to another one. Yikes. Still not equal to 0. Okay. Well, let's subtract 6x, subtract 6x, and we will have 8x squared minus 6x equals 0. Again, GCF. And I see that my GCF is 2x. So I'm left with 4x minus 3 equals 0. And I'm going to go ahead and set each of these terms equal to 0. So 2x, or each of these factors, equal to 0. 2x equals 0, and 4x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, I'm going to divide by 2 and divide by 2. I'll get x equals 0. And here I'm going to add 3 and add 3 and get 4x equals a positive 3. Still not done with this one though. Got to divide by 4 and divide by 4 to get x by itself. And now I have x equals 3 over 4. So my answers here would be x equals 0 and 3 over 4. Don't panic, it's a fraction, but you're fine. Just follow the steps. Okay, here we go. It's equal to 0, but this time there's an a term. Can I factor something out? Why, yes, I can. I can factor out a 3. So I will have x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 0. So all I did right here is I just factored out this GCF. Okay, so let's go ahead and factor. I'm going to go ahead and use my factor tree. I'll put -4 at the top and a 3 at the bottom. So what multiplies to -4 but adds to a positive 3? Well, that would be 4, a positive 4, and a -1. So I'm going to go ahead and write my 3 because that was my GCF outside. And then x plus 4 in one set of parentheses and x minus 1 in another set of parentheses and set them all equal to 0. Okay, now I'm going to solve them each individually. So 3 equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. And x minus 1 equals 0. Well, in no universe here is 3 equal to 0. So that we can just cancel out. It's not a solution. Here I would subtract 4 and subtract 4. Here I would add 1 and add 1. I'd be left with x equals -4 and x equals positive 1. So I'm going to just jump back to writing them as an ordered pair again. No big deal. A -4 and a 0. And, whoops, not an x. Don't know where my whiteout went. So just a 1 and a 0. And that would be your solution. Okay, next one. Ooh, I have a GCF. Woohoo! Okay, so my GCF this time is 5, which means I'm going to have x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. And then I can go ahead and x factor this part, right? So I'm going to do a -12 on top and a -4 on the bottom. What multiplies to a -12 and adds to a -4 will be a -6 and positive 2. So I'm going to do 5 parentheses x minus 6 parentheses x plus 2, all of it equal to 0. Then I'm going to set up my factors equal to 0. So 5 equals 0, x minus 6 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0. Well, 5 is not equal to 0, not ever. And then plus 6 and plus 6, minus 2 and minus 2. I end up with x equals 6 and x equals -2. Oh, and let's be consistent here. Again, I'm going to write them as an ordered pair just because why not? So 6, 0 and -2, 0. And that, my dear friends, is solving quadratics by factoring. Please come to office hours if you have any questions. And hope you guys are doing well. Miss seeing you. Yeah, okay, bye.